President Trump standing behind his $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund, even as Republican senators increasingly condemn the idea. And the controversy threatens to divide his party even further. Trump writing today on social media, quote, "I gave up a lot of money in allowing the fund," saying he could have settled his lawsuit against the IRS for $10 billion over his leaked tax returns for much more. The New York Times reported this week, we should note, that IRS lawyers had prepared several ways for the Justice Department to fight Trump's $10 billion lawsuit. They wrote this down in a 25-page memo passed on to the Treasury Department, although it's unclear if that memo ever reached the Justice Department. Ultimately, the Justice Department, which reports to Donald Trump, of course, never fought the lawsuit, leading to this highly unusual situation. Both Treasury and IRS did not respond to the New York Times request for comment, and the Justice Department did not tell the Times why it chose to settle this case the way it did. Sources tell CNN that the White House has no plans to change the structure of the fund.
Trump is no longer facing opposition only from Democrats. Now, longtime allies like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones are openly discussing his removal. For years, Trump's base defended him through impeachments, investigations, and scandals, but that loyalty is beginning to crack. The criticism is now coming from inside his own movement, and even his strongest supporters say he may have gone too far.
Even after a fraught meeting on Capitol Hill yesterday between the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and several upset Senate Republicans, the White House says the administration appreciated the feedback and looks forward to additional conversations as needed. Well, it looks like they will be needed. Senate Republicans abruptly left town last night without acting on key legislation, specifically Trump's immigration package. The White House is now feeling the full force of a furious majority. Former Republican leader Mitch McConnell rebuked the pitch, saying, quote, "So the nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assault cops? Utterly stupid, morally wrong. Take your pick," unquote. How about both? Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson is one of the few senators who has publicly supported the fund, but he does see its introduction on the same week as his key vote on Trump's immigration bill, angering his party at the wrong time, saying, quote, "Somebody described it as a galactic blunder, and I think that's probably true," unquote.
Some of Trump's own allies now argue that he is too unstable to control the military or nuclear arsenal, and that the 25th Amendment should be considered. The breaking point was his rhetoric on Iran, after warning that a whole civilization will die if Iran rejected his terms. Even longtime supporters began distancing themselves. What sounded less like diplomacy and more like a threat of catastrophic war has pushed talk of removing Trump from the margins into his own political movement.
Joining us now to discuss, CNN's Laura Fox and Paula Reed. Paula, what are your sources telling you about why the White House and the Justice Department are so dead set on sticking by this fund and the way it's being distributed, which is confidentially and anyone can apply, despite the questions and the backlash?
They're true believers. Look, they have been swimming in this idea and this concept for years. It goes back to 2023 when Trump was thinking about taking back the White House. And anyone involved in the creation of this is either a Justice Department lawyer, a White House lawyer, an IRS lawyer, a Trump personal lawyer. These are the people that really believe that the president was mistreated while he was out of office, that he was a victim of the Justice Department, and other people were too. And they truly believe that once they pick these 5 members and the rules are laid out, that people will see why this is a good idea. But they put forth a ton of money, not a lot of details, and there's no reason that taxpayers should just believe, right, 5 as of yet unnamed people will protect this from becoming a feeding frenzy.
Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are openly resisting Trump's agenda, blocking his bills, and rejecting his pet projects. Many fear he is wasting Republican control of Washington, damaging the party, and become a major liability before the midterms. This is no longer quiet frustration. It is open defiance from within his own party.
And they have refused to rule out that people who were convicted of beating up cops would get some of the money. They just
also an optics problem, yes.
Well, optics at the very least. And Lauren, you talk with these Republican senators day in, day out. Help us understand why else they're so frustrated with Trump's calculation here.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really tough week for Senate Republicans, in part because they saw one of their colleagues, Senator Bill Cassidy, ousted on Saturday night. Then you saw Senator John Cornyn, who was once the Republican whip in Trump's first administration. It was announced that his challenger was going to be endorsed by Donald Trump. And there was this feeling in the United States Republican conference in the Senate that if this can happen to John Cornyn, it can happen to any of them. And it really, I think, made a lot of Senate Republicans that I was talking to rethink how far they are willing to go for this administration, because there is a sense that there is no limit. And anytime you take this risk, there's a possibility that Donald Trump can come for you in the future if you cross him even in the slightest way. This was one of the Republican senators I talked to yesterday of Indiana, Todd Young.
The people who should be helping Trump advance his agenda are increasingly standing in his way. But the most serious warning is not simply opposition from Democrats. It is the growing criticism coming from people who once stood firmly inside Trump's own political movement. After Trump issued an extreme warning about Iran, calls to consider the 25th Amendment began spreading beyond Democratic lawmakers. Right-wing figures and former Trump allies, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, and Anthony Scaramucci, began publicly questioning his judgment and fitness for office. That does not mean Trump's entire base has abandoned him, but it shows that concerns about his leadership are no longer limited to his traditional enemies. The criticism is now coming from people who previously defended him through impeachments, investigations, scandals, and years of political controversy.
How do you stop a war that people already oppose? Well, as with so many things in democracy and politics, there is a spectrum and there is volume. And Trump already has an unpopular war on his hands with a gas price problem, which is part of why he is almost desperately seeking a quick off-ramp, perhaps thinking that his threats will work. We've discussed how they are unlawful either way. But now we're seeing more cracks on the right. Tucker Carlson, who literally campaigned for Donald Trump last cycle, was at the convention giving the speech, now condemning this, and something we've also seen criticism of, which is that Donald Trump always has his own style, yada, yada, but the profane, vulgar, and increasingly erratic behavior, some of which landed on Easter Sunday.
Killing non-combatants, people who did nothing wrong, who didn't choose this war, who were just people created by God, that is immoral. That will never be moral. That can never be justified. That is always wrong. How dare you speak that way on Easter morning to the country? Who do you think you are? You are not God, and only if you think you are do you talk this way. To send out a tweet with the F word on Easter morning promising the murder of civilians and then saying praise be to Allah without explaining any of it, that is evil.
Now, you can look at this a number of ways. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Tucker asks, as if he has not seen Donald Trump's entire political career, or one could argue public life, when it comes to vulgarity or poor timing or a thirst for a type of dominance and violence that has no bearing in ethics or justice. If those are your issues with Trump, they are not new. And yet on the other side, I promised you the other side, politics is addition. And if the anti-war movement, combined with what we saw, a very powerful No Kings movement, is going to build and add, it may welcome people, at least on a momentary or effective basis, like Tucker Carlson, because they at least agree on the fact that Donald Trump lied about this war and brought us into it, and we need to get out of it. That's what they might say together. Speaking of strange bedfellows, I've mentioned in our coverage that Alex Jones is a conspiracy theorist who cannot be relied upon for anything factual. But in politics, where everybody's sounding off, he is now a longtime MAGA right-wing figure who sounds like a resistance warrior, bringing up, and you might remember this from the first term, talk of removing Trump early through the 25th Amendment.
At the same time, Senate Republicans are increasingly resisting Trump's legislative agenda. They have criticized controversial spending proposals, block policies they believe are politically damaging, and refuse to defend some of Trump's personal projects. Instead of automatically following his demands, Republican lawmakers are beginning to make decisions based on their own political survival. The midterm elections are a major reason for this shift. Republicans want to campaign on the economy, border security, and government competence, but Trump's inflammatory rhetoric and off-message comments repeatedly force candidates to defend controversies they did not create. His poor approval ratings are making that problem even worse. As Trump becomes less popular nationally, Republican candidates in competitive districts have a stronger incentive to distance themselves from him. Loyalty becomes harder to maintain when association with the president threatens their chances of re-election.
Joining me to talk about all of this is our NBC News team, White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor has the latest from Capitol Hill. Vaughn, let's start with you. How significant is it that the president can't seem to make this controversy over Epstein go away, especially considering how much fallout there is from his own base?
Right. I think it's notable, Ryan, that this is somebody who does not typically make concessions. And that's what he has done by going and seeking the Department of Justice to go to the court to have the unsealing of the grand jury transcripts from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein indictments. Of course, Tom can get into the details of this. That is a far cry from actually calling for the unsealing of a great vast amount of other evidence that would maybe be more revealing of other associates of Jeffrey Epstein and any details that could relate to potentially President Trump himself here. At the same time, this is where the Wall Street Journal article that came out last week suggests that there is, well, not potentially criminal in nature, unflattering substance that could very well exist inside of the Epstein files. But that is where the president here is not, for now more than 2 weeks, been able to push this aside, because for years now, some of his most fervent supporters, one of their key rallying cries has been the idea of putting President Trump back into the White House so that he and his Department of Justice could reveal and unseal all of the Epstein files because of the very serious claims that they make. We know that Jeffrey Epstein, Ryan, had a vast number of victims in very serious cases that Jeffrey Epstein was directly involved in. At the same time, there is another bucket of conspiracy theories that supporters of the president believe that Jeffrey Epstein was a part of here. And so there's a lot to this. At the same time, the president is clearly not able to get this and push this aside.
And to that,
Removal from office remains unlikely. Invoking the 25th Amendment would require Vice President J.D. Vance and a majority of the cabinet to take action. Impeachment would require the House to approve charges and the Senate to convict Trump by a two-thirds vote. There is currently no clear evidence that either process has enough support. But the real danger for Trump is not immediate removal. It is the visible collapse of automatic loyalty inside his own coalition. Political power begins to weaken when allies stop defending a leader without question, when lawmakers discover they can oppose him publicly, and when members of his own party start placing their careers above his demands. Trump still controls a powerful Republican base, but the cracks are becoming harder to ignore. The pressure is no longer coming only from Democrats, the media, or outside opponents. It is now coming from inside his own movement.